Over the years, there have been some strange tales surrounding the qualification process for international football's biggest tournaments. Ahead of the 1930 World Cup, there was no qualification process since FIFA couldn't even convince 16 teams to take part. Prior to the 1934 World Cup, the United States and Mexico both actually travelled to the finals in Rome and played their final qualification playoff game at the Stadio Nazionale, the venue for the tournament's final, just 3 days before the tournament actually began. Oh, and in 1989, Chilean goalkeeper Roberto Rojas cut himself with a razor blade that he had concealed in his gloves and pretended to have been hit by a flare in an attempt to get Brazil disqualified for World Cup qualification and have Chile take their place instead. It didn't work, and Rojas was banned from the sport for life by FIFA when his great deception was exposed. For all these weird and wonderful qualification anomalies and scandals, all of which are worthy of videos all of their own, there is only one team that has participated in the qualification process for a Euros or World Cup, failed to qualify, and has still managed to win the tournament in question. Denmark had a very good national team for such a small nation in the early 1990s. In Michael Laudrup, you could argue they had the best player in the world. Alongside him was his younger brother, Brian Laudrup, starring for Bayern Munich at the time. Up front, they had Flemming Povelsen of Borussia Dortmund, and between the sticks, there was recent Manchester United recruit Peter Schmeichel. It was a talented, albeit quite youthful group of players who looked as though they could become Denmark's strongest team in decades. For all their talent though, it seemed like Euro 92, which was set to be hosted by their near neighbours Sweden, had come just a little bit too soon. Drawn in qualifying Group 4 alongside Northern Ireland, Austria, Yugoslavia and the Faroe Islands, Denmark put up a brave fight, winning 6 games with only 1 draw and 1 defeat to their name. The Yugoslavia team that finished 1 place, and indeed 1 point above them, at a time when only the qualifying group toppers qualified for the finals, were a fantastic team. Whilst the qualifying campaign was still ongoing, Yugoslav First League champions Red Star Belgrade beat the likes of Rangers and Bayern Munich en route to lifting the European Cup, defeating the French champions Marseille on penalties in the final. That Red Star team, containing the likes of Darko Pankev, Robert Prosinecki and Sinisa Mihailovic, formed the basis of Yugoslavia's very formidable team. But they could also call upon the finest talent from Dinamo Zagreb, Partizan and Vojvodina. Yugoslavia reached the quarter-finals of Italia 90, with eventual finalists Argentina requiring penalties to get the better of them. But they were considered to be an ever-improving side. Denmark actually managed to beat Yugoslavia 2-1 in Belgrade, but they were beaten 2-0 in Copenhagen, meaning their draw with Northern Ireland proved to be costly. However, over in Yugoslavia, there were bigger concerns troubling the nation than the upcoming European Championships and any chance their impressive squad might have had of finally winning the tournament, having been losing finalists in 1960 and 1968. The strength of Yugoslavia's union had been under threat ever since President Tito's death in 1980, and in 1990, Slovenia became the first nation of the former state of Yugoslavia to declare independence. From June 1991 onwards, over a period of 10 months, Yugoslavia was formally broken up. The dividing lines between the newly independent nations and different ethnic groups sparked a decade of devastating conflict in the region, collectively known as the Yugoslav Wars. Fighting was at its bloodiest right around the time of the 1992 European Championships, as the Croatian War of Independence, the Bosnian War, and the Kosovo War all raged on, as whole regions were blighted by ethnic cleansing, genocide, and bloody warfare. Almost 150,000 people lost their lives. A further 4 million were displaced, permanently altering Europe's makeup and demographics. On May 30th, 1992, just 11 days before Euro 92 was due to get underway, United Nations Security Council Resolution 757 was adopted by the United Nations. It was the 9th resolution adopted by the United Nations Security Council relating to Yugoslavia, reaffirming all of the previous restrictions that had been adopted, but this resolution included sporting sanctions, banning the state of Yugoslavia from participating in any international sporting competitions. The Olympic Committee were able to reach a compromise with the UN, allowing Yugoslav athletes to still compete at the 1992 Summer Olympics, but as independent participants. But there would be no reprieve for the nation's talented footballers. It was a crushing blow for an extremely gifted national team, who could well have taken Euro 92 by storm. Yugoslavia had bigger fish to fry than football and far greater tragedies than missing out on a major tournament. But on a professional level, it was a cruel fate which befell footballers with little involvement in the conflicts. With just 10 days until the finals due to get underway in Sweden though, UEFA had to find a replacement for Yugoslavia following their ban. There was no time for any kind of airsats qualification process. There wouldn't even be time for a set of playoffs between the second place sides. Ultimately though, neither would be required. Whichever way you looked at it, Denmark were the obvious choice. Not only had they been runners-up in Group 4 behind Yugoslavia, they also won the most points of any of the qualifying runners-up, and indeed more than a few group winners. One of the most extraordinary aspects of Denmark's success at Euro 92, as it is told, is the fact that they had so little time to prepare for the finals. Whilst other teams were enjoying training camps and warm-up games, Denmark's squad had supposedly been out of action for a month since the regular season finished, and were kicking back with their flip-flops on and a cocktail in hand on a sunny beach someplace. This wasn't actually true of most of Denmark's players, a number of whom, including Brøndby midfielder Kim Vilfort, had been following the situation in Yugoslavia closely and were well aware of the possibility that the team who toppled them in qualifying may be disqualified. Nonetheless, manager Richard Moller Nielsen would have to very hastily name a 20-man squad and try to get them up to speed ahead of a major international tournament. For Moller Nielsen, it would not be as simple as being able to name Denmark's 20 strongest players. You see, during Euro 92 qualifying, rather a large rift had emerged within the Denmark ranks. Moller Nielsen was a defensive-minded coach, whose first priority was to keep things tight at the back, make sure you didn't lose games, and then try to pick your moments to win them. Denmark's most gifted players felt restrained by Moller Nielsen's tactics, and in November 1990, starman Michael Laudrup, his brother Brian, and Liverpool legend Jan Molby retired from the international game. Molby was aged 27, Michael Laudrup was 26, and his brother Brian was just 21. Moller Nielsen had never seemed particularly fond of Molby, but the loss of the Laudrup brothers came as a significant blow. Once UEFA had banned Yugoslavia and offered Denmark a lifeline, Moller Nielsen did likewise to his two finest outfield players. Brian Laudrup accepted the olive branch, but Michael refused, supposedly rating Denmark's chances so poorly that he didn't feel it was worth cutting his summer holiday short. The bookies seemed to feel the same way. Back in 1992, the Euros was still a tournament with a stern qualification process followed by an elite-level finals made up of just 8 teams. Replacing Yugoslavia, Denmark went into Group 1, alongside France, England, and the host nation Sweden. Considering there were only 8 teams at the finals, Denmark's pre-tournament odds of 20-1 to win the tournament reflected their status as rank outsiders. When Denmark's players arrived at their training camp in Sweden, Richard Moller Nielsen told his players that they were there to win the tournament. His players couldn't help but laugh. Denmark were a decent team, but they knew expectations from the outside were very low. The lack of preparation and preparedness, twinned with the loss of Michael Laudrup and the quality of their opposition, meant anything other than 3 straight defeats would be deemed as a major success. In their opening game, Denmark faced an England team that had only lost in the semi-finals of Italia 90 to eventual winners West Germany just 2 years earlier. England had lost the likes of Brian Robson, Chris Waddle, John Barnes and Gazza during that time, but they were still tipped as heavy favourites to win. Moller Nielsen's defensive solidity earned Denmark a 0-0 draw though, and on the break, they actually created the better opportunities. The Danes took heart from their performance and began to wonder whether, if they could more than match England, they actually had anyone to really fear at the finals. In their second game against the host nation Sweden, Denmark once again created the better chances, but a single Thomas Brolin strike saw their near neighbours emerge victorious. It was the first time Denmark and Sweden had met at a major tournament, and when the final whistle blew, the Swedish commentator remarked, "And it's all over for Denmark." Few would have disagreed. Following a draw and a defeat in their opening 2 games, and ahead of their final group game against France, Denmark were now priced at 150-1 to win the tournament with the bookies. France were the pre-tournament favourites at Euro 92. They had comfortably seen off the challenge of Spain and Czechoslovakia in qualifying as the only team to win all 8 of their qualifying games, and with a squad boasting the likes of Laurent Blanc, Didier Deschamps, Eric Cantona, and their starman and the reigning Ballon d'Or winner Jean-Pierre Papin, who had scored 38 goals in 45 games for Marseille during the previous season, being rewarded with a world record-breaking move to AC Milan, which made him the world's first £10 million footballer. France still hadn't actually won a game at the Euros, but nor had they been defeated, and with Denmark still viewed as the group's whipping boys, their chances looked good. Before the game, some of the French players asked John Sieverbeck if Denmark would go easy on them because they didn't want to pick up any injuries ahead of the semi-finals in just a few days. When Sieverbeck, who knew a number of the French players as he was playing for Monaco at the time, relayed that message to his teammates, they couldn't quite believe what they had just heard. Standing in the tunnel before the game, Peter Schmeichel said he could sense an arrogance from the French players, and the mood within the Denmark camp quickly switched from self-pity and disappointment following their first 2 games to anger and of having a point to prove in their final group game. Denmark took the lead through Henrik Larsson before being pegged back by Ballon d'Or winner Papin on the hour mark. At that point, Denmark looked out on their feet, and France had the bit between their teeth, so Moller Nielsen took drastic action. Brian Laudrup was among the Danish contingent who hadn't seemed fully fit going into the tournament, and though he was arguably the nation's outstanding outfield player, Moller Nielsen substituted him and replaced him with Lars Elstrup. A man with an unusual and sometimes troubled past, Elstrup had left Luton Town in 1991, and he would retire of his own volition a year after Euro 1992, aged only 29. However, in this game against France, Elstrup scored with his first touch, and the game finished 2-1. France wouldn't have to worry about any injuries ahead of the semi-finals, since they wouldn't be in it. Sweden topped the group, and Denmark progressed as runners-up. As Group 1 runners-up, Denmark would face the Group 2 winners, the Netherlands, in the semi-finals. Denmark may have scraped through against France, but most viewed this one as a total mismatch. The Netherlands team was special. Koeman, Blind, De Boer, Rijkaard, Gullit, Bergkamp, Van Basten. It was a team of superstars from 1 to 11. The Netherlands were the reigning European champions, and they had topped their group, with Bergkamp in particular looking as though he was untouchable. As soon as the group stages had been completed, everyone was already talking about the final. The great rivalry between the Netherlands and Germany being reignited. The Netherlands had knocked Germany out of the Euros en route to glory in 1988, but Germany returned the favour en route to their own glorious success at the World Cup in 1990. The Netherlands had emerged victorious in the group stages in Sweden, but that was just the prelude to an epic trilogy in arguably European football's greatest international rivalry. Though few people were talking about it, there was still the small matter of the semi-finals for both teams to overcome. Germany did their bit on June 21st, beating the hosts 3-2 thanks to a late goal from Karl-Heinz Riedler, and then came the turn of the Netherlands on June 22nd. Once again, Denmark felt as though overconfidence had seeped into the Dutch dressing room, just as it had done with France. Their upset against Les Bleus seemingly hadn't taught the Dutch anything. Denmark took a 1-0 lead on the 5-minute mark through Henrik Larsson, before Dennis Bergkamp equalised midway through the first half. Larsson restored Denmark's lead in the 33rd minute, and they appeared to be holding their own. But then came, quite literally, a shattering blow, as Henrik Andersen cracked his kneecap in a collision with Marco van Basten. Though he was only 27 at the time, Andersen only ever won one more cap for Denmark, which wouldn't come for another 2 years, and repeated injuries to his knee eventually forced him to retire, aged 33. Andersen was one of Denmark's star players, and his injury in the 70th minute, and the severity of it, knocked the Danes for 6. They looked shell-shocked for the last 20 minutes, and just 4 minutes from time, they conceded, after failing to clear their lines from a corner that was flicked on at the front post. It was vital that Denmark regrouped ahead of extra time and regained their concentration and some composure, since the game only looked to have one outcome at that time. In truth, the Netherlands dominated proceedings during extra time, but they failed to make their possessional chances count for anything in terms of football's most precious and important currency of goals, as Peter Schmeichel stood up tall in the Denmark goal. When the final whistle was blown in extra time, Denmark were quietly confident, well aware that their number one was a pretty special talent. Denmark converted all 5 of their penalties, while Schmeichel denied arguably the best centre-forward on the planet, Marco van Basten, from just 12 yards out, to spoil the Netherlands' plans of meeting their old foes in the final and of retaining their European crown. In spite of everything, their failed qualification, lack of preparation, and upsets against 2 out of the 3 pre-tournament favourites, Denmark was still written off by most before the final. Whether it was Mexico at the 1986 World Cup or Belgium in 1972, Germany had a nasty habit of being unmoved by upsets, with a willingness to follow the script with a stereotypically German ruthlessness and efficiency at major tournaments when it mattered most. What's more, the Germans were writing a fairy tale all of their own. West and East Germany were actually drawn against each other in Euro 92 qualifying just months after the fall of the Berlin Wall. But in October 1990, Germany was reunified, and in November 1990, the DFU, and with it, the East German national team, was absorbed into the DFB, and the 2 German national teams became one once again. Euro 1992 qualifying Group 5, therefore, had just 4 teams rather than 5, and the reunified German national team qualified 1 point ahead of Wales. So Euro 1992 was the first major tournament to feature East and West Germans playing side by side since the 1938 World Cup, 5 years after Hitler became Chancellor and more than 50 years before Euro 92. Though West Germany had enjoyed great success following World War II and the Allied occupation, Germany had never actually won a major trophy as a unified nation. But here they were, at the earliest possible opportunity, with a brilliant team, in a final against a team who, initially at least, had failed to even qualify for the tournament. So Germany were big favourites, not least among Germans back at home. Before the final, Denmark, along with the rest of the football world, had caught wind of Germany's planned victory celebrations, beginning at the airport and then on to Berlin. This may well simply have been a case of the Germans being well prepared in the event of a final win. But to the Danes, who had already been written off so many times, it seemed like their opposition was exhibiting arrogance once again. And like Michael Jordan in The Last Dance, they took that personally. On the 18-minute mark, future Arsenal midfielder John Jensen, a man who had never previously scored for Denmark, having represented his country for 5 years, and a man who had only ever scored 4 goals at club level, aged 27, thundered the ball into the back of Bodo Illgner's net. In the words of Brian Laudrup, if Jensen scores, and he doesn't score many, then you know you've got a chance. An hour later, Denmark extended their lead. Kim Vilfort, the 1991 Danish Footballer of the Year, had missed Denmark's final group game against France, despite being one of the team's star men. Vilfort briefly left Sweden to return to Denmark and visit his daughter, who was suffering with leukemia. His family twice sent him back to Sweden to play in the semi-final and final, and it was in the final, following plenty of rearguard action, that Vilfort gave Denmark fans reason to finally start to believe that they could become European champions. His turn and dragged finish found its way into the back of the net via the right-hand post. At that moment, he had all but guaranteed that Denmark would win the European Championships. Shortly after he returned home, Vilfort's 7-year-old daughter Lena tragically died. Whilst Jensen and Vilfort provided the inspiration at one end, no one was more responsible for Denmark's ultimate success than Peter Schmeichel. A string of superb saves during the second half, most notably from Jürgen Klinsmann, visually seemed to suck the confidence out of the lives of the German players, as if they had accepted that, on this day, no matter how hard they tried, they were not going to beat the Dane. In 3 consecutive games, Denmark, who hadn't even managed to qualify for the finals, beat the tournament favourites, the reigning European champions, and the reigning world champions, with virtually no preparation, without their best player, and with an unfit star centre-forward who didn't score a single goal at the tournament, en route to being crowned as European champions. It was the most unlikely of success stories, but so much of Denmark's success owed to the tight bond between their players, both on and off the pitch. 10 of Denmark's starting 11 in the final had previously played together at Brøndby. Most had reached the semi-finals of the UEFA Cup at Brøndby in 1991, which was a huge achievement for the club. Many had played together in either Denmark's youth or Olympic teams. As manager Richard Moller Nielsen put it, Denmark didn't have the best players, but they had the best team. Michael Laudrup returned to the Denmark squad in August 1993 under Moller Nielsen, but Denmark failed to qualify for the 1994 World Cup, finishing below Spain and the Republic of Ireland. Denmark remained the smallest nation to have ever won the European Championships, roughly half the size of the next smallest winners, Greece, in terms of population. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to leave a comment if you have any thoughts, and go ahead and subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC Sevens. There will be plenty more European Championship related content in the coming days, weeks, and I suppose months-ish, along with plenty of other videos for your viewing pleasure. So, thank you all as ever. You can also find me on social media by the username @HITC Sevens on both Twitter or Instagram, should you wish to do so.